Welcome back to the Fork Drawer. I'll be your host, Fork 2002. Does that sound kind of presumptuous whenever I say welcome back? Like every time I go to McDonald's, the drive-thru speaker always says, "Welcome back to McDonald's." Well, how do you know I've ever been here? I mean, I have, but how do you know? Anyways, the gameplay you're watching right now is Call of Duty Black Ops 3. We've got a couple good games, one of them from Knockout and the other one from Splash. What I want to talk about now is the PlayStation Neo, Sony's upgraded version of the PS4 that can supposedly output 4K resolution, although no one knows how. Gamers seem to be pretty divided about this. Some think that this is a bad move by Sony and that it's kind of screwing over their customers, whereas others think that this really isn't a big deal. I mean, we upgrade our cell phones, computer parts. All the other PlayStations have even had a redesign at some point in their life cycle, so why should this be any different? Well, if you haven't seen my previous video on the subject, go check that out, and I discuss why I think that Sony releasing a more powerful console just 3 years into the PS4's life cycle is not the same as those other technological upgrades. But just because something's different doesn't mean that it's bad, as I've been told my whole life. But let's take a look at some of the perceived problems of the PlayStation Neo. Gamers that are still playing PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 are soon going to be upgrading to an 8th gen system due to the dwindling support of the older consoles. So, those that chose not to support the PlayStation 4 up until now are going to be treated to a better, more powerful console than those that helped it reach 40 million units sold and become wildly successful, which is a burn in particular for those of us who pre-ordered it and bought it on day one because we wanted that next-gen experience and to be at the forefront of console gaming. Now it's like we're half a gen behind just 3 years in. And yeah, I know, we're already behind the PC Master Race. But like I said in the last video, that's the concession we make for the simplicity and the low cost. But now we're going to have to buy our console all over again if we want to just stay current. Now they had to know that the consoles were already underpowered when they were released 3 years ago. At least everyone else did. What they could have done was design the PS4 with upgradability in mind and make it modular, like the N64 was with the expansion pack. That way you only have to replace one thing instead of the entire console. And I'm not saying turn it into a PC where you're constantly upgrading your RAM and buying new processors and graphics cards. With Sony proprietary parts, that would be horrible. What I mean is, place these components within a single unit that you can pull out and replace once within the lifetime of the console, and that way you don't have to rebuy your hard drive and your Blu-ray player and your power supply and your motherboard and your DualShock 4 and all these other things that the PlayStation Neo isn't improving upon. Also, it's going to lower the resale value of the base PS4. Once the PlayStation 5 comes out and you're selling your old console to make money and shelf space for the new one, no one's going to give you as much for your PS4 if it's not the 4K version. Some of you might say that these are trivial complaints, and I would be inclined to agree. A lot of the PlayStation Neo evangelists are saying, if you don't want to upgrade, don't upgrade. You're just going to get the same experience you would have had anyway. Why be upset if somebody wants to pay for a better one? My response to that is, how do you know? How do you know that we're going to get the same experience that we would have had anyway? So let's take a look at what the PlayStation Neo actually is, and then we'll talk about how this can affect the experience on the base PS4. Sony really wants to get ahead of things and make sure that the PS4 owners don't really feel gypped or cheated by the PlayStation Neo version, like they're missing out on a lot. So they've given developers a list of strict guidelines that they have to follow when developing games for the PlayStation Neo. Eurogamer got a hold of those guidelines, and if you want to check them all out, I'll put the link in the description below, but I just want to cover a few key points here and talk about how this is either good or bad for the PS4. Most of the guidelines can be summed up under everything must be equal between the two, with a few exceptions, and we'll get into that too. But for instance, first of all, no exclusive games can come out in the PlayStation Neo, like they did on the new 3DS. So whatever games come out for the PS4, you're still going to be able to play them on the base PlayStation 4. Also, there can be no exclusive features, so if the PlayStation Neo version has a split screen mode, then the base PS4 has to be able to have that split screen mode too. If it can't run it, PlayStation Neo has to scrap it. I think those 2 points are great things for the PlayStation 4, for the base PS4, and it's going to help keep things on an even playing field and really maybe not make you feel so bad about not upgrading. One of the things that they also cannot do is have exclusive servers. So if you're playing Call of Duty Infinite Warfare online, you're going to have people from the PlayStation Neo and from the base PS4 in the same lobbies. This is good and bad. It's good because Call of Duty already fragments their player base enough as it is, and I talked about that in a previous video. Go check that out. But the bad part is I'm using Call of Duty as an example. This could apply to other games too. A lot of people that I play Call of Duty with on the PS4 are PC gamers, and they come to consoles because they like how everything is an even playing field. For instance, if the PlayStation Neo version is going to have better resolution and a better frame rate, then people are going to be able to react to you better than you can react to them. Call of Duty goes to great efforts to make sure that the games maintain 60 frames per second, except for you last-gen Black Ops 3, because they know how important it is to be able to have that quick reaction to anything that pops up. It could be the difference between getting the kill or not getting the kill. And with a better resolution, they'll be able to obtain a better sight picture of you at a distance. Also, some games use your frame rate in some of the calculations within the game code. Sticking with Call of Duty, up until Black Ops 3, they used a system known as frame rounding, and some other shooters may use this as well, where basically the fire rate of your weapon is directly tied to your frame rate. This caused some problems on the PC where there's a wide variety of specs, and some people would have a better frame rate than others, therefore have a more accurate and better fire rate than somebody with worse specs. These guidelines also specify that every game must run natively in 1080p minimum. It can't run any lower than that, and frame rate must be able to meet or exceed the base PS4 version. Now, I understand the purpose of this guideline, because if they don't do this, then the people that buy the PlayStation Neo are going to feel gypped, and it's kind of a wash, like why even do it? But let's dive into a rabbit hole. Let's go into this hypothetical situation that probably won't happen, but what could happen is, what if a game has to run at 1080p on the Neo and it can only maintain, say, 52 or 53 frames per second at that resolution? Because as we talked about in the frame rate video that I had a while back, sometimes games will sacrifice frame rate for a better resolution, or a better resolution for a better frame rate. And for a hypothetical game, since the Neo version can't go below 1080p, maybe the frame rate has to suffer a little bit. Since the guidelines for the base PS4 are a little bit more lax, maybe it can maintain 60 frames per second at the resolution that it runs on the base PS4. If that's the case, then this hypothetical developer could possibly lock the frame rate on the base PS4 at 45 frames per second. That way, the guidelines on the Neo game are still being met, and therefore giving the base PS4 game a subpar experience compared to what it could have been without the Neo version existing. Now I realize that's a long shot. With 40 million PS4s in the wild, why would they try to screw over their biggest customer base? My only point is the potential is there. What they need to do is build the game for the PS4, make it as good as they can for the PS4, and then use the power of the Neo to upgrade a few things, maybe give it better textures, better resolution, some bells and whistles. What would be bad is if they max the game out on the PlayStation Neo and then try to dumb it down to fit within the specs of the PS4. Because then we're going to get a clunky version of the game that runs like crap, like Hyrule Warriors does on the original 3DS. When the PlayStation 4 launched, it came with two first-person shooters, Battlefield 4 and Call of Duty Ghosts. I believe that the developers of these two games took two different approaches in regards to making the game work on last gen and current gen. When you played Call of Duty Ghosts on the PS3, it looked fine. It looked like the next Call of Duty game should look. It looked, average, whatever. Whenever you played it on the PS4, it didn't really look like it was that big of a jump. Yeah, you could tell it was a better resolution, it ran a little bit better, but it didn't really feel like you got that next-gen experience. Whereas, in my opinion, playing Battlefield 4 on the PS3 looked like crap. It didn't look as good as other PS3 games did at the time, and that's my opinion, I guess. But whenever you look at it on the PS4, it was one of the best-looking launch games. Of course, it had its problems and errors and glitches, but just the way that it looked better. Coming from a non-developer, non-programmer standpoint, my assumption is that DICE tried to make a PS4 game, and when they were done, got it to work on the PS3, whereas Infinity Ward tried to make a PS3 game, and when they were done, they upscaled it to work on the PS4. Another example of this is Call of Duty Black Ops 3. It is atrocious on last gen. It looks like crap, it runs like crap, and it has 30 frames per second frame rate lock. I don't think any other last gen Call of Duty game ran less than 60 frames per second. That was the golden standard for Call of Duty games. But since they're trying to max out the current gen version of the game, trying to shove all that content into a game that can run on last gen isn't easy, and they had to make some great sacrifices. Now don't get me wrong, I understand that this is an entire generation gap, and last gen versus this gen is a much bigger difference than what this will be compared to the Neo. And developers should be focusing on this gen over last gen, absolutely. They should just scrap last gen altogether at this point. but I believe my analogy is scalable, and the same thing could happen to a smaller degree if developers focus on the Neo version. Apparently, gamers aren't the only ones less than thrilled with the whole situation. Former IGN journalist and kinda funny co-founder Colin Moriarty, at No Taxation on Twitter, tweeted out, "A trusted source tells me that most developers are not happy with the PS 4.5 and having to develop around it, extra cost, planning, and other nonsense." It makes sense to me that it would be an extra burden for the devs. I mean, first-party studios normally only have to make one version of their game, now they gotta make two. A lot of people think that it shouldn't be too hard for third-party developers who make a PC version of the game, since the PC has a range of graphics settings. But it seems to me that it's not quite that simple. And PC versions of games are often ported by a separate studio. Not to mention indie devs, I can only imagine that it would be a bit more of a struggle for them too. And anytime a developer has to fix a glitch or add some kind of update to the game, those patches cost money. And if Sony's going to charge for each patch, because it's going to require two patches, one for Neo, one for the base PS4, then that's kind of screwing over the developers, especially the indie ones that maybe can't afford those patches quite as easily. Marketing, that's going to be a nightmare. Whenever you have the big screen up at E3 and you're saying this game is going to be out on PlayStation Neo, and you're going to have people having side-by-side comparisons from the base PS4 to the Neo. Their goal is going to be to convince PS4 owners that they aren't missing out on anything while still trying to sell the Neo. So there are two possible outcomes. Either the Neo is worth it and the people that supported the PS4 in the first place are going to get shafted, or the PS4 version is pretty much as good and the Neo isn't worth it. So in a seemingly lose-lose situation, why do this at all? Well, the speculation is that PlayStation VR, formerly codenamed Morpheus, needs extra power that the Neo is going to provide. Morpheus? Neo? I see what you did there, Sony. And if that's the case, VR quality might be poor on the base PS4. And in virtual reality, quality is kind of a big deal. And if the Neo is pretty much required to have an adequate experience, it cheapens the advantage over the PC VR units, like Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive. Because while the PSVR isn't quite as high-end as the PC counterparts, the big sales point was it only cost $400, and if you already had a PS4, you were good to go. Whereas the Oculus is $600 and the Vive is $800, plus you need like a $2,000 gaming PC to even run it adequately. Granted, PSVR and a PlayStation Neo is still going to cost around the same as an HTC Vive by itself, but now the burden of entry has essentially doubled. So my conclusion for the PlayStation Neo is that it shouldn't be a problem for consumers if the developers take my advice, because I know they're watching. Finish the base version of the PS4 game and then upgrade to Neo, and make sure that the base version of the game is just as high quality had there not been a Neo. Unless you're interested in PlayStation VR, in which case this may be an additional cost. If at this point they're finding out that the PS4 can't handle the VR adequately, then this is really their only option. Their major sin was getting PlayStation 4 owners prematurely hyped up for PSVR. Anyway, I'm not too thrilled about PlayStation Neo, but I'm not too worried about it either. We're just going to have to see what happens. It could go either way at this point, but I do want Sony to succeed. I wouldn't say that I was necessarily a fanboy, but I always choose PlayStation because I do believe that it has a better quality experience. And it really kind of sucked knowing that the PS3 was the superior system and seeing it pretty much get the shaft the entire generation. But to see Sony get off on the right foot with the PlayStation 4 was pretty cool, and I really hope that the Neo isn't the wrench in the works that everybody's been worried about. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments section, what do you think about the PlayStation Neo? Is this thing good, or do you think Sony's shooting themselves in the foot? Also, let me know what you want to see out of the channel, something that I could cover that would be of particular interest. Anyways, thanks again, everyone. Give me a like if you liked the video, dislike if you didn't like the video, and subscribe for future content. Until next time, may the fork be with you. Boom. So did I.
Cody, I'm right behind you.
Aqua fork, aqua assist. Aqua Avenger. That's pretty cool. Aqua Avenger. Aqua Ripper shut down, right? Point blank. Aqua fork. What'd you say?
Ready for deployment.
Well, it doesn't sound as cool, but doing it was pretty cool.